Good afternoon and welcome to Friday's Lunchtime News. The head of the US Treasury went down on bended knee and begged lawmakers to give the go-ahead to his $700 billion banking bailout.
The extraordinary scene came minutes after a breakdown in talks to secure an extraordinary deal using US taxpayers' money to jumpstart the world's banks. Now, negotiations will restart in a few hours, but if a way isn't found to resuscitate the cash-strapped banking system, President Bush warned this sucker's going down. Well, that's already too late for 500 people here, sacked this morning. HSBC claimed collapsing profits meant jobs had to go at its city headquarters. And mortgage lenders across the UK are raising interest rates today, making it even harder for those desperate to borrow. We'll talk to our correspondents in Washington and in the city. But first, here's Harry Smith with the latest in the soap opera that's gripping the world's economy.
Good morning. Chaos on Capitol Hill. Tempers flare in Washington over that bailout plan as lawmakers refuse to make a deal.
It's a drama that spans the globe, a cast of characters drawn from the rich and powerful. And while they fight at the top table, those all around suffer the fallout. Like many of the best stories, it all started with such hope.
My hope is that we can reach an agreement very shortly.
But his optimism was very misplaced. That such a meeting like this should take place at all was extraordinary weeks before a presidential election. But if this was high drama, what happened next more resembled comic opera. The Treasury Secretary, the nation's most powerful banker, got down on one knee to plead with the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, to back his planned bailout. Those who witnessed it said she replied, "It's not me that's blowing up this, it's the Republicans." The bickering spilled over into the corridors of Congress, with Republicans putting forward an alternative which would not risk taxpayers' money.
It is a plan, again, that does not require $700 billion of taxpayer dollars to go in and bail out Wall Street. It is a plan that allows for the taxpayers who did nothing wrong to be able to continue to look to their retirements, to look to their college savings plan.
The role of the president came in for fierce criticism.
The president has got to go to work here. We're not going to come to a conclusion on a three-legged stool here, missing the fourth leg.
Hours after Washington went to bed, the talks having failed, they began to arrive for work at the bank of HSBC in London's Canary Wharf. But for 500 of them, there will soon be no job to go to. Victims of the cuts, which will see more than 1,000 HSBC jobs go around the world. Many awoke this morning to hear the news for the first time.
Well, I'm not too excited by it, but these things happen.
Was it a shock?
Well, it's a little surprise on the radio, but we'll find out more when we get inside.
This is just the latest in a string of job losses in London's financial sector. Few doubt it'll be the last. Talks on America's planned bailout will resume in Washington later today. They'll be watched closely here and around the world. Harry Smith, ITV News.
And we can speak to our correspondents covering this story on both sides of the Atlantic. Martin Geisler is following developments in Washington and Juliette Bremner is at the Bank of England. Let's go to Martin first. Martin, everybody looking at their newspapers over breakfast this morning and pretty well everybody else would have thought this was a done deal.
Absolutely, Alistair, and now they know it's not. Nobody wants to use the P word here, panic, but a statement has just come out of the White House in the last few seconds, the headline being US financial system under real stress, need meaningful financial settlement now, and that's how serious it is. Essentially what's happened here is that the deal that had been drawn up has been ambushed by a group of conservative Republicans who fundamentally disagree with the principle of taxpayers' money being used by the government to bail out private companies. We were told when this crisis meeting happened yesterday at the White House it was just going to be a matter of rubber stamping a compromise deal that had been drawn up. But on the way in, apparently, this group said, you know what, we're not going to sign up to this, and we've drawn up a deal of our own. Cue meltdown in the meeting, panic, raised voices and so on, and then this extraordinary situation of the Treasury Secretary literally getting down on bended knee and begging people not to blow this deal out of the water. I mean, it's an amazing imagery, isn't it? Can you imagine in Britain, Alistair Darling literally begging David Cameron to help him out? That's how serious the situation is here.
And that simply is because, from a world economy point of view, something's got to go through.
Absolutely. You mentioned George Bush's quote earlier on. He said if some money isn't loosened up, this sucker could go down, referring to the economy. The problem is they're asking hardcore Republicans to do something that is complete anathema here. The very bedrock of the American political system is you don't use taxpayers' cash to bail out private companies. Someone here said earlier this week, people have got to learn that if you touch the stove, your fingers get burned. The problem with that analogy is that the pain is going to spread not just within this company that we're talking about here, but right across every household in the States and further afield. They've got until Monday morning, realistically. Opening bell on Monday morning on Wall Street is the deadline for this, to sort this deal out. And the feeling, I think, is that they will do it somehow because they have to. But at the moment, they're in a very serious stalemate.
And finally, Gordon Brown is heading from New York down to your direction for talks with George Bush at the White House. What's Mr. Brown's agenda?
Well, he's always talked about shoring up the global financial system to ensure that things like this can't happen again, more transparency. This all came because a bunch of bad debt was being passed around from place to place, like a kind of a deadly game of pass the parcel. And he wants to make sure, he wants to press the point that once this is solved, if it is eventually, that a system of checks and balances is put in place to make sure it can't happen again.
Martin Geisler, live in Washington. Thank you.
And to Juliet Bremner now at the Bank of England. Juliet, nearly 900 city jobs gone in 2 days, mortgage rates going up. Whatever is decided or isn't decided in Washington has a huge effect here.
Yeah, that's right. Well, of course, whatever happens on Wall Street is going to impact here in the city. And we saw share prices going dramatically down this morning, up to 100 points off at one stage. But probably more important to people at home is the fact that banks are again pushing up those mortgage rates. And that is because the banks themselves are having to pay more to service those mortgage loans. It all comes down to something called the swap rate. That is the rate at which banks and financial institutions lend to each other. At the moment, they're simply too frightened to do that. So this rate, the swap rate, is going dramatically up. And the Bank of England has once again had to step in to try and limit the damage. They are going to put on the table, in addition to the international deal, another £40 billion. On Monday, that will be available for banks with essentially assets to swap on a 3-month basis in the hope they can get this money moving again and that it will bring back confidence into the city and the whole freeze that we've seen over the last few weeks will stop and we can once again get back to the usual status quo.
Right, Juliet Bremner at the Bank of England.